Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. I'm your host, David, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about having effective conversations and communicating clearly with Jason Thomson. For more than 2 decades, 1,000 some odd projects, he's a speechwriter, storyteller, pitch specialist. Jason Thomson has been hired to passionately win over audiences and sell ideas through content, writing, and storytelling. He's an avid hat collector, a super Lego enthusiast. Jason, I have to ask you, which do you have more of, hats or complete Lego sets?
Complete Lego sets by a country mile. I have every single Lego architecture set that has ever been produced. And listen, the thing is, you can bankrupt yourself with Lego, and forget those RSPs, people. If you really want to make money, buy Lego sets that are about to retire because they skyrocket in value. As a good example, the Taj Mahal that was first produced, I believe, in 2006, went on sale for about $400. Now to buy that new in box on eBay is about $8,000 US. So there is your real investment.
There you go. All the nonprofits, forget about investing the money. Donor brings you money, buy some Lego set. And I'm just kidding.
Lego.
Well, maybe I'm not
hey, listen,
kidding.
there's a story about a guy who bought a bunch of Lego sets and then flipped them, after they retired, and bought a real house. Cash. Yeah.
That is a solid plan. Solid plan. So the key is to be tuned in to what's happening in the marketplace and the Lego sets. That's solid.
Drop me a line. I'll get you hooked up.
Amazing. Jason and I go back a few years. He's a super awesome guy. So happy to have you here on the show. And we're going to be talking about content. So let's talk about conversations. So holding better conversations, what do communicators need to do? What are they doing wrong?
They're doing a lot wrong, but the primary way that I describe it is we are misconnecting with audiences. Oftentimes, we look at a connection we're trying to make, a communication that we're trying to make, something we push out, like an email, social media campaign, or a conversation that we're having with somebody one-on-one. And our objective is the wrong objective. Oftentimes it's like, I gotta say, here's what I gotta say. Listen, I'm a speechwriter and a speaker coach. And it's the number one thing that I get at the very beginning of the journey for anybody who is putting together a presentation is here's what I want to say. And it's actually the wrong thing to focus on. You need to understand what your objective is, what you're trying to get out of that conversation, and what you need to give your audience to be able to get there. And so that is the art of connection. You've got to spend less time worrying about you and more time worrying about them, right? So if you make that goal, that what does a strong connection look like? That's going to solve so much. Everything from an external facing thing like a campaign, all the way down to your spouse. Oftentimes we get into this whole idea of who's right in a conversation and it spirals out into an argument. The thing is if your whole focus is, how do I better connect with this person? The whole game changes. And it's not about who's right. The other thing that is really interesting is that we're not recognizing in communications about just how much content we're shoving at somebody. So I've just talked for about, let's say 2 minutes. I can hit you with 400 words. What do you remember? Well, you'll remember what gets repeated. That's one of my favorite lines. What gets repeated gets remembered, which is misconnection. If we misconnect, then we have a problem. And I like that better than disconnect, because disconnect is what an audience does, is they'll just give up on you. Misconnection empowers you to be able to do the things that you can effectively drive a conversation in a way that is fruitful for both you and the other side.
That's awesome. I love the idea of spinning it and understanding, okay, misconnection means you can still reframe it. You can still reconnect. You can still try to create that meaningful bond, that emotional connection with somebody else to have a real conversation.
Yeah.
So why is that so important?
Why is that so important? Because we're pushing a lot of junk at the world that is already overloaded. And with that overloaded world is the response is rarely what you imagine. One of the biggest issues with social media is we don't respond, we react. And reaction is not generally positive unless it's something that, your small community, you're preaching to your community. I did this, I voted, whatever that is. And everyone's like, good for you, which of course is endorphin rush and all that sort of thing. But the truth is if you really want to test the impact of empathy, is see how much empathy that you have for someone when they disagree with you. And elections are a really great way to demonstrate that, right? If there's somebody who ran for election, let's use our favorite pinata, Donald Trump, right? Is you hear from somebody who voted for Donald Trump. Now, if you're on one side of the spectrum, you're like, yeah, good for you. You know what? We're going to make America great again. And on the other side, you'll get, you're an idiot. Both of those are a reaction. Neither of them is a response. If you disagree with someone voting for Donald Trump, you can't just simply categorize them as something, label them. Your goal is to be able to understand them. Why? Someone said to me this great thing around communication. If somebody says something that doesn't sit right with you, your first response is to become a detective and to be curious and to understand why. Now, when it comes to something like not-for-profit, that is really about understanding the audience. Why are they not engaging with you? Why are they not buying into the campaign you're creating? What does it take to activate them? That's a big part. You know, like I said off the top, instead of asking, what do I want to say? What you really want to do is you want to start by saying, what do I want to achieve? And then looking at the audience to say, what can you give them effectively that helps you achieve that, to let them trust you, to build that relationship? Because that's what you're doing. In an overloaded universe, it's very difficult to get a quick response in the exact way that you want it. You need to build this over time. And that's relationship building. And that comes through connection as opposed to communication.
There's a lot to be said for applying some business strategy around it, right? So you have leading and lagging indicators, right? So you need donors, you need volunteers, you need participants in your programs or people signing up for your services, all that type of stuff. What's the, if you look at project management methodology, what's the work back schedule for that, right? What do you need to do? How many people do you need to connect with to get one donor? And as you multiply that up, as you amp that up, as you connect with more people, you'll be able to refine what your messaging is. You'll be able to refine how you connect with people, the platforms you connect with people on, whether you pick up the phone or send them a message or do some ads and target them. And you'll be able to directly understand, okay, if I'm doing this over here, the end result, the net result is going to be this. And then you can increase that dial as you work on it.
I do a lot of audience profiling and pitching. In pitching, it's interesting because you generally are doing it to a small group of people, 5, 7, 8 people, but these thing scales are up. Oftentimes when I pitch, I ask the organization that I'm leading the pitch to, tell me about who you're pitching to, and they can't. What they can tell you about is their idea, their feature set, all of that sort of thing. And the truth is that audiences don't buy your feature set. They do not care about you. What they care about is them. And so your job is to really build that connection so that you demonstrate how you are the wind beneath their wings. One of the things that makes me bristle about the internet is the About Us page, right? Nobody cares about us. They don't care where you went to school. What they care about is, what can you do for me? And that does extend for sure to not-for-profit, because what you're trying to do is activate an audience that has time or money in a way that gets them to shine their light on you. So let's take a simple example. I live north of the city in Bradford. One of the causes that I like to support is our local food bank. So why do I do that? How are they able to connect with me? Well, for one is it starts with me. What are the things in my values that are important? And feeding a community is something that's really, really essential. So then the question becomes is, how do you take them, much like what you just described, which is a sales cycle, right? Is how do you take them along the journey to where they begin to execute? And so that is a smart move by the food bank to be able to look at me and say, well, here's how I'm going to move you along that journey. You move me along that journey by being what I call it MERV, meaningful, interesting, relevant, valuable. That's MERV. That's what audiences want most in any way, shape, or form. I do, like I said, a lot of presentation coaching. I even do this on my own radio show that I've got, is that really to get people on the show is I hit them where they are, right? What is it you've got a book to promote? Like, that's what people want to be able to do. And when you're trying to develop community or that approach of basis, is that what you've got to do is you've got to think about your audience first. They are everything and everything that they want. And we know that. We say it till the cows come home, until the moment becomes that we have to put that About Us page together. And the About Us page is about all the great things that we do. And again, it's not about us. It's about them. And it's about empowering them to be extraordinary and get them on board with our journey.
100%. You want to create that emotional connection, that reason why somebody wants to help. And it's different for everybody. I think there's some main categories in there, right? Like maybe if you're focusing on Alzheimer's research, maybe somebody in their family or a friend has been affected and that's what's driving them. Maybe it's just something that their parents or grandparents were involved in and that's why they're doing it. It varies from everybody to everybody, and really understanding here are the main reasons why people are involved with your organization, why they give, why they care, why they donate their time, why they show up in an event, why they gave $5 last year.
That's why one of the reasons that the Sick Kids Versus campaign is so good, because what they've done is that they have taken families that feel that they are victimized by health issues. And listen, I did storytelling coaching as a sick kids parent for years, right? There's a lot of tears, there's a lot of emotion involved in that. And they twisted it in a way that said, yes, I can be empowered. I can feel strong. I don't have to feel like a victim, and I can participate in this extraordinary journey. They tapped into something that existed that nobody else was tapping into. And that's a beautiful way to connect.
And they were able to stand out with it, right? They understood the persona of the person, the psychographic of the person, not the geographic. I mean, obviously, geographics plays a bit in it, right? But not necessarily the demographic, but the psychographic. What is it that people care about? What drives them? What motivates them? Where do they spend their time? And really getting into that idea will help you understand what I'm going to call your customer base, but really it's your donor base or your participants, right?
I want to push you one step further, because in traditional marketing, we look at demographics and psychographics. Those are great to be able to begin to profile an audience, but it's a third category. There's a guy out of Vancouver who runs a company called Value Graphics. And what he says is people do not make decisions based on demographic and psychographics, generally speaking. You can make the argument around community, et cetera, but they do tend to make buying decisions based on values. And he tells this great story. And the story is there's three friends. They go out for dinner one night, and the end of the night, they're on their way home and they walk by an alley. And what happens is the first person whose primary value is adventure says, shortcut, let's go. The second person whose primary value is safety says, you know what, this looks kind of sketchy. Why don't we go back to the bar and call an Uber? And then the third person whose primary value is friendship says, you know what, guys, we can work this out together. And what ends up happening is that I've told you all of that about how they make the decision, but what I haven't told you is anything in the demographic or psychographic space. And so this guy, David, I've forgotten his last name. What he's done is, what's that?
David
Allison. Do you know David?
I do.
So David, who's probably the best keynote speaker I've seen in the last couple of years, David has actually gotten several 100,000 data points that he can pull from that will help you look at those values.
Yeah, his valuegraphics.com, if anybody is interested in it, we'll give him a little shout out on that. But yeah, he's absolutely phenomenal, the work that he's done. He's got an email list, sign up for it. Lots of great value that he sends out from that for sure. So the one thing that we can do better as communicators would be obviously, having meaningful connections with the audiences that we want to connect with. Is there another top one that you would say, hey, everybody, you need to focus on this?
We're getting into tactics now, and I'm not going to give you one. I'm going to give you four.
Four, okay.
The first one is the number one recommendation I make in every workshop, every keynote that I give. Learn to speak in headlines, which sounds a little glib, but we live in a headline world now. There was a great study done on users for Reddit a few years ago that said, in the comments section on Reddit, what happens is if you post a link to an article as the subject of the story that you're trying to get across, people will comment on that story. And 75% of those people who comment on that story never read the article. They only read the headline. And we can bray against the fragmentation and the attention span of our audiences, but honest to goodness, you're not going to get anywhere. We live in a headline world. You look at everything from social media posts to the conversations that we have. If you can get at the headlines quickly and effectively, then you can get your audience to buy in. I did that with this answer. I said there are 4 things that you need to pay attention to. That's a listicle. And there's a reason for that, is that now you have a bookmark in your head that you might not be conscious of that says, okay, he's going to go through 3 more. The first one is headlining. Get great at headlines. And in the world in which you live, The headline should be about context, not necessarily content. Don't just tell me what, tell me why or how. That's about empowerment. The second thing that you have to understand is that audiences don't read and they don't listen. They scan. This is something that has really risen. And one of the things that we've seen as a change in audiences over time is that they look for a hierarchy. Your place to learn about great communications is your favorite app, because look at the way it creates hierarchy, visualization. A magazine article is the perfect example of the way that works. Headlines, subheadlines, pull quotes, pictures. How do you do that in any communication, including just having a conversation? By giving a summary up front saying, that reminds me of 3 really important things. Is there something called the Zargonic effect, right? Is that your body knows when it's going to basically be triggered against all those things. So scannability and headlines, that's 1 and 2. Number 3 is true storytelling. And what I say is true storytelling is often when we use narrative storytelling, beginning, middle, and end, we give a case study, right? Here was the problem, here was the solution, here was the result. In the corporate world, the issue with case studies is they're bereft of emotion. And the reason storytelling works, the reason that storytelling lights up the entire brain versus data points, which just light up the small language processing center at the front of the brain called the Broca's area, is the reason that it lights up the entire brain is because it makes emotional engagement. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to pick a moment in time. That's the easiest thing that you can do. And then you can take your audience and put them in the story, almost like it's your movie and they're the extras standing around the movie. If they can see it, they can feel it, they can visualize it, they can buy into it a whole lot more easily. And that detail is what makes a massive difference for a person. Saying something as simple as, I was sitting on an airplane, they were getting ready to close the doors, and I was on the phone call of my life. I can empathize with that. I've been on the phone call of my life on a plane where the door is about to close, and you've created an emotional connection. The last one has been my weird hobby over the course of the pandemic, which was behavioral economics and how you move an audience. The thing is that we push these walls of words at people like I'm doing right now, and we're not doing it in any way that is conscious about what we're barfing at them. And using the word barf is actually deliberate, because it's a word that rakes up an audience when they're, did you just say barf? What? And I'm back in, right? The number one thing that I say from behavioral economics that you can do effectively is associations and triggering. People remember stories because they're a triggering mechanism. I use something called human highlighter, right? Which is to say, listen, if you're going to write one thing down, write this down. That's triggering, because what you do is you remember that one thing and then it unpacks all of the other stuff. So there's your 4: better headlines, scannability, true storytelling, and associations and triggering. If you focus on those 4 areas in any type of communication that you give, again, one-on-one conversation, mass mail campaign, whatever that looks like, you are actually on your way to meeting the new audience on where they are.
One thing I wanted to mention, if anybody's watching this, you might have seen me go off screen for a sec. I went to grab a book that I've got. It's pretty short. It's under 100 pages by Ian Harris. It's called Hooked on You.
Yes.
And this is a super amazing read. It is, I don't know, like $5 on Amazon if you want to go and grab it. But it talks all about storytelling and the power of it and how you can do it and how you can bring that into everything you're doing, from the simplest email to mail list to presentations to podcast episodes to whatever it is that you happen to be doing. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a quick read and it's well worth it for sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down right now.
To that in the show notes, for sure. All right. We're talking about storytelling. We're talking about connecting. We're talking about empathy and, being able to bring people into the conversation. A lot of times in nonprofits, we need to make presentations, right? Whether it's to board of directors, whether it's to potential big donors, whether it's at a gala, whatever it happens to be. And you spoke a little bit about presentations and bringing people in. Do you have any other thoughts around, like, who cares, right? So yeah, you're doing a presentation, but like, who cares? Like, what is the value of this to me?
The biggest thing with presentations, and this is what I spend most of my day doing, is to get off of autopilot. We have learned early in our careers a set of skills: how to write an email, how to run a meeting, how to attend a meeting, how to take notes, how to give a presentation. And like Jurassic Park, where we freeze the mosquito in the amber, we stick with that, right? You have a new presentation that you're giving. You look back at the last deck that you wrote, right? And then you start pulling slides and you build your narrative from that perspective. And the issue becomes your foundation was faulty to begin with. If you want to be effective in presenting, you have to start with, and I call it the sugar stack. So the name of my company being Speak Up, Get Results. The sugar stack is 5 steps. And here's the quick Cole's Notes version of the 5 steps. First, you have to sit down and say, why am I presenting? What am I trying to get out of this? And be careful here, because in a lot of my coaching, I'll say, well, what are you trying to get out of the presentation? They're like, well, I'm trying to get people to learn about this product or service. That's not what you want. What you do want is you want people to email you at the end of the presentation. You want them to connect with you, right? And so how do you trigger that? And that's the second thing, is you have to look at your audience and what they need. We have to remember that any presentation is not the full conversation. It's the beginning of a conversation, or it's the end. You are looking to create curiosity or closure. That is what you need to focus on. So you don't need to say everything. We think we need to say everything in a presentation, but the presentation's job is to drive a sales cycle forward. The third thing you'd focus on is structure, which is what is the narrative that you get out. And I create something called a blueprint, which is literally what's the story that I'm able to tell in a way that's effective, that meets the audience for what they need, which then delivers what I need. So you see, I'm working backwards.
Right.
The fourth move is engagement, right? What tools can you apply? I always say that at the end of creating a blueprint, you have a presentation. It's a boring presentation, but it is a presentation. Now you need to color it up like a coloring book where the lines are the presentation. Now you put those colors inside. And the key then becomes, how do you use things like storytelling and headlines and association and triggering and navigation, scannability. I have a deck of cards that have like more than 51 tools that you can use, and there's hundreds that you can use to engage an audience. That's really pivotal to get to that MERV approach of meaningful, interesting, valuable, and relevant. And then the last thing is about your performance. And when you speaker coach somebody, they think it's entirely about the performance, but there are a number of things that you need to know. The number one of which is rehearse more. You're not rehearsing enough, and you're not rehearsing effectively. You don't need to do everything linearly. Just rehearse once, find the rough patches, get better at those rough patches. And the number one place you want to get better at, of course, is your first minute. You have 4 seconds to make emotional engagement with an audience in a presentation. Don't waste it by saying, good morning, it's great to be here, right? Of course, it's great to be here. Of course, good morning. Give me something. Give me that headline, right from the get-go. So those are the 5 steps of the sugar stack, that whole idea of understanding what you need to do, then understand what the audience wants, get to that idea of structure, engage, and performance. When you walk through those 5 steps, you have a better shot at connecting with the audience, and that's the secret sauce. You're getting past that misconnection.
I think that's really great. And one of the things that people don't really think about is, okay, yes, so you've got presentations, you're in the boardroom, you're on stage, whatever it happens to be, you're meeting with somebody at their home, whatever it is. What people seem to forget is their website, right? So you've got your website, it's up, it's online, it's presenting your organization all day, every day to anybody that hops onto it. What are some, I guess, key ideas that people can grab from the sugar stack to implement maybe on some key pages in their website?
Okay. If you want to make a website more engaging, again, start with your audience. What is it that they need or want from you? What can you give them that will keep them interested as you move them along the sales cycle? So imagery, storytelling, headlining. Headlining will become a really important thing that they are making decisions on and landing on your page for fractions of a second sometimes. You got to give them the clarity and the reason to be there in the first place. And I'll tell you straight up, worked on my own website a lot. I've done SEO, and the feedback that I get from my team is, listen, you aren't keeping people on the page. And the question became, well, why? Why am I not keeping people on the page? And one of the things we learned really quickly is they have no idea what you do. You started, and I started with just this idea of, are you misconnecting? And which creates intrigue, but then I need to pay that off almost immediately. So we dropped in a key headline that shows how Sugar delivers keynotes, workshops, master classes and things like that make you better at pitching presentations and conversations. There's the story really quickly and the value. The other thing, of course, is we take it one step further, which is, well, why do I think this is important? Well, I want to win more pitches. I want to win more business. I want to win over audiences. I want to win in a conversation with my spouse, whatever that looks like. Is that winning is the triggering effect that keeps people there. So the headlines will become a really important thing. Get that copy shorter. I'm a copywriter. Say less more often. If you can do that, that's a really effective way that you can do that. And then the third thing is, draw into that storytelling. Again, true storytelling that will get the audience engaged in a way that's interesting. I remember working on a program for one of the hospitals a couple of years. This was a pitch situation. And one of the things that we did was we said, recast your website like it was a documentary. Pull back the curtain. Show me what the day of a surgeon is like when the surgeon is getting ready to meet with my kid, right? For example. And suddenly that's a very valuable thing because you're giving the audience from that MERV approach something that's interesting, something that's valuable. I don't know. Years ago, I worked with a lawyer who was doing a presentation, and she was getting ready to do, like a presentation to a bunch of mall walkers in Newmarket. And I said, okay, well, what are you going to talk about? Because she asked me to coach her. And she goes, well, I'm going to talk about the wills and estates and what we do. And I'm like, yeah, these people are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They don't have a lot of time left, right? You want to make the most of their time. And we transform that into 5 things a lawyer will never tell you about developing your will. Oh, intrigue. I want to learn. I have value. And eventually that meant that she increased her business as a result of it.
That's amazing. Absolutely. And, one thing I want to add into what you're talking about with the headlines is you want to have the headlines about the people you're talking to, right? Not about yourself, right? So it's not like we help fight dementia and Alzheimer's. It's, I don't know.
You can help fight dementia and Alzheimer's.
Exactly.
Be the difference in the fight against dementia and Alzheimer's. And that's it. It's the judo flip, right? Is that oftentimes we're talking about, what we're doing. It's not what you sell. It's how they buy. That's the important part. Again, and I hate to be so blunt, but the honest to goodness truth is, as human beings, what activates us most is it important to me right now? And to make it important to me, don't tell me about you. Tell me about me.
Right? You want to give them that intrigue, give them that, I'm in the right place. I want to deal with this. I need to help with this, right? And by making it about them, you're drawing them in and making them feel like they're already part of what you do.
That's right.
And I think that's really key.
I think that's really key as well. Again, I call it hyper empathy, right? Hyper empathy will get you a lot of places in life. I've been reading recently a number of relationship books. I'm scouring anything to learn about communication as I'm working on my own book. And relationship self-help books are incredible at demonstrating that in relationships, we tend to focus on, I'll call it the first layer, the superficial layer of a conversation. You left your socks on the floor, right? And then that blows up into a 2-hour magnum opus argument. The thing is that it's never about the socks on the floor. The socks on the floor have triggered an emotion in your person across. So how do you get to the emotion? You address the emotion through connection, right? It's like, if someone says you left your socks on the floor, your first response shouldn't be, yeah, well, you ... right? It should be, oh, you know what? I hear what you're saying. And I have a feeling that that's creating frustration for you. Let me go pick up the socks. And that could be the end of it, right? Is to say, I was inconsiderate. Is that in that type of connection or relationship, you need to stuff down your desire to react and then respond to what you're seeing there. And what you're really responding to is not that superficial layer. It's the next layer down, or the layer down from that, which is identity based, right? Which is, like you were late for picking up your son. What I might hear is, hey, you're a bad parent. In presentation coaching, there's a guy that I've worked with, and he has the most incredible exercise, which is when you finish rehearsing a presentation, and you can do this for anything, any type of communication, hand over an advertorial that you create, have someone read it. At the very end of it, what you say to them is, turn over the advertorial, look me in the eye, and tell me, what do you remember? And that is what they take away. And the number of times that I've seen in one-on-one communications where I say to somebody, what did you hear? When they repeat it back, I was like, that isn't what I said at all. So I need to be better at my communication for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Jason, amazing thoughts. Love MERV, love sugar. You've got some awesome stuff and insights around the power of communication and what people should be doing versus what they're potentially already doing, likely what they're already doing. I hope people listening to this have been able to get some great advice and pointers from you today and what we've been talking about. And I want to challenge everybody that's listening to this, just take one insight. That's it. Talk to one person in your organization, colleague, coworker, somebody in a different department, higher up, lower down, whatever it happens to be, and tell them about what this one thing is that you took away from today. And
What's the one thing you're taking away from today, David?
the one thing I'm taking away from today is I need to rethink my webinar a little bit. I think I've got it pretty good. I'm going to connect with you later on about that, but I think I can definitely move to improve that. What my
But
goal
this is a great, actually, you just brought up a really great thing. So when you started doing webinars a couple of years ago, I immediately started pitching you on things you can do. You don't want to hear that. What you want to hear is hey, David, where are you? What kind of response are you getting? What are you loving? What are you hating about your webinar? And then suddenly, because I'm making it truly about you, you are engaged. And that's the thing. In connection, you want somebody to take away your stuff and make it their own, because now you triggered that inside. That's the easiest way to convince somebody of something is don't convince them of anything. Have them convince themselves of things.
And that's the Jedi mind
That's
trick.
the Jedi approach.
There you go. 100%. So take one thing, talk to somebody about it, mention it, have, 2-3 minute conversation about it if you can. If you can't, take one thing and just implement it. Take a look at your website, take a look at a brochure, take a look at a presentation, take a look at an email that you've just sent out to a prospective donor. What can you change the next time that you send that out? So, Jason, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what do they need to do?
3 ways. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's always a great place. Jason Thomson, that's Thomson. I publish a metric ton of content every week that I try to get people to have those better conversations. You can also drop by speakupgetresults.com. That's where you can see the sugar stack and all of the things that we provide. But it's not simply about selling you. Remember when I talked about Merv? There's a blog area. And in the blog area, everything from the episodes of the radio show that I run, right down to infographics. I'm a big fan of infographics and, giving you tools and skills that you can go and do. And of course, while you're there, if you check the show notes, I guess, I'm going to give away one of the products that I sell, which is, I mentioned, the card pack, the sugar packet. So these will be 51 engagement tools. I'm going to give away 3 of these. So if you check in the show notes, there is a link there that's going to take you to a page. Page is going to ask for your email address, but it's really, really valuable to get that email address because I send out this monthly email, which is, here's an awesome infographic and that sort of stuff. I sell through value, right? And so I'm going to give away 3 packs of these cards, and hopefully we can build a sort of relationship that's going to be helpful to you going forward.
Yeah, and these cards are absolutely amazing. You can use them in meetings. You can use them as you're working on your content. You can use that to help drive your communications and your connections forward in a way that you might not have thought about doing in the past. So thanks again, Jason, for joining on the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. To everybody listening, if you want any of the links or resources that Jason provided or that I spoke about, head over to our podcast page at nonprofitdigitalsuccess.com/podcast. Click on this episode for all the details. And until next time, keep on being successful.